Now we will see complete list of WWE Draft in 2023. The Bloodline, drafted to SmackDown. Cody Rhodes, drafted to Raw. Bianca Belair, drafted to SmackDown. Becky Lynch, drafted to Raw. The Street Profits, drafted to SmackDown. Edge, drafted to SmackDown. Matt Riddle, drafted to Raw. Imperium, drafted to Raw. Drew McIntyre, drafted to Raw. Bobby Lashley, drafted to SmackDown. The Miz, drafted to Raw. The OC, drafted to SmackDown. Damage Control, drafted to SmackDown. Shinsuke Nakamura, drafted to Raw. Indy Hartwell, drafted to Raw. Alba Fire and Isla Dawn, drafted to SmackDown. Hit Row, drafted to SmackDown. Apollo Crews, drafted to Raw. Candice LeRae, drafted to Raw. Dexter Lumis, drafted to Raw. Lacey Evans, drafted to SmackDown. J.D. McDonough, drafted to Raw. Natalya, drafted to Raw. Brock Lesnar, as a free agent. Austin Theory, drafted to SmackDown. The Viking Raiders, drafted to Raw. Charlotte Flair, drafted to SmackDown. Maximum Male Models, drafted to Raw. Sonya Deville and Chelsea Green, drafted to Raw. Zoe Stark, drafted to Raw. The Usos, drafted to SmackDown. Asuka, drafted to SmackDown. Baron Corbin, as a free agent. Latino World Order, drafted to SmackDown. Rhea Ripley, drafted to Raw. The Brawling Brutes, drafted to SmackDown. Karrion Kross and Scarlett, drafted to SmackDown. Seth Rollins, drafted to Raw. Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens, drafted to Raw. The Judgment Day, drafted to Raw. LA Knight, drafted to SmackDown. Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez, drafted to Raw. Dolph Ziggler, as a free agent. Shelton Benjamin and Cedric Alexander, as a free agent. The New Day, drafted to Raw. Trish Stratus, drafted to Raw. Shotzi, drafted to SmackDown. Elias, as a free agent. Ronda Rousey and Shayna Baszler, drafted to Raw. Braun Strowman and Ricochet, drafted to Raw. Bronson Reed, drafted to Raw. Pretty Deadly, drafted to SmackDown. Alpha Academy, drafted to Raw. Caden Carter and Cartana Chance, drafted to Raw. Rick Boogs, drafted to SmackDown. Cameron Grimes, drafted to SmackDown. Akira Tozawa, drafted to Raw. Emma, drafted to Raw. Dana Brooke, drafted to Raw. Mustafa Ali, as a free agent. Indus Sher, drafted to Raw. Grayson Waller, drafted to SmackDown. Johnny Gargano, drafted to Raw. Los Lotharios, drafted to Raw. Tamina, drafted to SmackDown. Omos and MVP, as a free agent. Nikki Cross, drafted to Raw. Von Wagner, as a free agent. Odyssey Jones, drafted to Raw. Zion Quinn, as a free agent. Piper Niven, drafted to Raw. Riddick Moss, drafted to Raw. Tegan Knox, drafted to Raw. Shia Lee, drafted to Raw. Thanks for watching.